So today we have an exciting presentation from Rabbi Dinerman, a topic that I've been personally waiting for with a lot of suspense, and that is the topic of unified purpose, an antidote to anxiety. There will be copies of sources shortly coming up, which will be passed around so you can follow along. And I'd like to invite Rabbi Dinerman up to the podium to address us on that topic. Once again, unified purpose, an antidote to anxiety.
In the year 1829, there was a Jew by the name of Reb Shloimeh. His last name was Freides. Reb Shloimeh Freides. He was not having a good week. He was not having a good month. He was going through a difficult patch. To sum it up, he was quite anxious. He was anxious over his health, and he was anxious about his business matters. And so he decided to pen a letter to a friend, a relative, who also was a spiritual master, a Rebbe, known as Reb Menachem of Lubavitch, the Tzemach Tzedek. Their children married each other, so he knew him quite well. And in this letter that he wrote to the Rebbe, he writes about his concerns, his worries, his anxieties. He lays it all out in the letter. And at a certain point in the letter he says, I throw up my hands, I turn to God in prayer, and I say, God, make me feel better. God, take this away. And this is the letter that he wrote to the Tzemach Tzedek. Well, his relative, the Rebbe, responded with a letter that has been preserved to this day and that we all can benefit from. He begins in this letter by pointing out that it is a great idea to turn to God in prayer over emotional matters. You know, it's quite obvious to us that we need to turn to God for, bane, chaye, mezoine, for our children, for our well-being, physical well-being, for our family. Sometimes it's less obvious that we need to do so for emotional matters. But if you look at our prayers, we'll notice there's this verse in Psalms where we say, Sameach nefesh avdecha, where we turn to God and we say, me, I'm your servant, please make me happy, make me joyous. Strip me of my anxieties. And in our prayers, we say, in the Amidah, we say, V'haser mimenu yagain va'anacha, may you remove from us all of this type of emotional anguish. Great idea that you turn to God for this issue. However, that's not enough. It's not enough to just pray. There's something you need to do about it, because there is something that you could do. And just like in any area in life where a human being can act, they must act, in addition to prayer. So too, when it comes to emotional matters, if there is something to do, and there is something to do, you must execute. And here he goes into a discussion about what can be done. Hasidus and Kabbalah has an entire psychological model for how it understands emotions. And one of the things it teaches is that emotions are deeply rooted within a person's soul. And as a result, when we're dealing with an emotional challenge, it is true that the problem could be deep within. And if indeed it is deep within, that could sound really, really ominous. That could sound like it's years to work on that. Well, the Tzemach Tzedek writes to Reb Shlomo, that is not the case. You don't need to worry about that. And that is because of the power of thought. The power of thought. According to the model, the psychological model of Hasidus, as much as there is a real active subconscious within the person, there is seichel, there is the intellect, there is the emotion, and it's all there. It's part of the nefesh, it's part of the soul of the person. The bridge to consciousness is through thought. And therefore, if a person manages to remove their thoughts from the matter that is vexing them, then the negative emotion will completely dissipate. And so therefore, he says, it is within your hands. We sometimes feel, he writes, that if you're thinking it, I'm a victim and there's nothing I could do about it. We know that action is within our domain. I could choose to act or not to act. I can choose to speak or not to speak. We get that. But with thinking, it's a lot more difficult. We just assume, I'm thinking, it is what it is. It's like the weather. I can't control it. I can maybe go with an umbrella or with a coat, but at the end of the day, I can't make it stop raining. That is an intuitive way many humans think about their thoughts. Writes the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, to Reb Shlomo, but it's not true. It's not true. Just like you understand that you could act or not act, just as you understand that you could speak or not speak, you can also choose whether you're going to think and not think. And if you are successful in removing your thoughts from these matters that are vexing you, watch, you will feel better. The emotion will dissipate slowly over time and eventually completely. But then he goes on to say, and says, I don't mean here that you should sit there and say, okay, so I'm not going to think about the fact that I'm worried about my health. I'm not going to think about the fact that I'm worried about my business, because by definition, that entire effort means that you're thinking about it. So that doesn't work. So what is the way to stop thinking about something? He continues in this letter and says, you need to have interesting things in your mind that you are attracted to, that you want to think about, whether it's holy matters or unholy, not unholy, but mundane. Whether it's holy matters or mundane matters, and those are go-to subjects that you're able to put your mind and vest your thoughts into that. By definition, then, your thoughts are not thinking about the vexing topic, and so then therefore, even if we're going to say that it's rooted deep within your personality, at the end of the day, it has no bridge to your consciousness, because there is no machshava, there is no thought. And how do I know I'm right? How do I know that the guidance I'm giving you is true? Because it says it in the Torah. Where does it say this in the Torah? Because we have a command in Parshas Shoftim that when the Jews were about to go to battle, the general would get up and say, Al yeirach bilvavchem. Do not be faint-hearted. Really? Do not be faint-hearted? You're telling me how to feel? What if I am faint-hearted? What if I am feeling anxious? What does that mean? Don't feel anxious. Every mitzvah has to be something that we actually could implement. How am I supposed to implement? It's a feeling. But if you look at Maimonides, and you look at the way Maimonides codifies that mitzvah, he's very, very clear with his language. He says that it is forbidden for the soldier to sit down and brew in thoughts about what's going to happen tomorrow in battle. What is going to happen when I go and I see the blood and I see the problems, when I see the fire, when I see the storm. What am I going to be doing? That is the problem. The problem is sitting and going actively through those thoughts. That is the prohibition. What do we see here? We see here that the Torah basically tells us that we have the ability to control what we think about. And that's number one. And number two, whether we will be fearful or not depends on what we are thinking about. And so therefore, the Tzemach Tzedek turns to Reb Shlomo and says, I'm asking you, I'm pleading with you. I know you're anxious over these matters, but please, try to set up more times of your day where you're doing productive things, where you're engaging your mind. He gives them examples of things to study. And when you are investing your mind in those places, it's less screen time for the negative thoughts, which will cause the emotions to dissipate. This is the crux of the first part of the letter. Now the truth is, if we go back to the Talmud, we'll find there's a debate in the Talmud about dealing with anxiety. There is a verse in Proverbs in chapter 12 that says as follows: Daiga belev ish, when a human has a concern, a worry, an anxiety, the language of the pasuk is yashchena. Yashchena. Now, the literal meaning of that word is cast it away, cast it down. And indeed, one of the Talmudic rabbis say that is the right way to deal with anxiety, cast it away, which I am suggesting is exactly what the Tzemach Tzedek was writing in this letter. Providing a recipe for casting away the negative thought. What does that mean, casting away the negative thought? Put your thoughts in good places, and through that you will cast away your worry. However, there is another Talmudic rabbi who says, come on, everything we need to debate, so we're going to debate this issue, and rather than yashchena, cast it down, with the same letters, yud, shin, ches, nun, hey, you could read it, if you change the nikudot, you could change it to yasichena. So rather than yashchena, yasichena. What does yasichena mean? Yasichena, speak about it. Which is, by the way, the exact opposite. One is don't dwell on it, don't give it eartime in your mind, how much more so in your mouth. And the other says, give it eartime in your mouth, because speak it over. Speak it over to who? To others. To others. So this is an example of where we have a verse in the Torah. The literal meaning gives us one, but we always know there's a second way to read a verse, especially the fact that Torah scrolls are written without the nikudot. That gives us license to read this second layer. We have here two views in the Talmud. What is the benefit of speaking over with somebody else? So Rashi tells us, the great commentator Rashi tells us, you're going to speak it over with someone else. They will hopefully provide you with great counsel, with good advice. Okay, we understand that. That's true. How many times have we been worried about something? We spoke it over with a friend. That friend provided valuable information. All of a sudden we found there's wiggle room and we found a solution. Okay, very true. But we also know that's not the whole truth. It's not only about getting good advice. We all know that there are times when we're anxious, we're worried, and we sit with someone else and we share what's on our mind, and we didn't get any advice, and yet somehow we feel better after. And the Rabbi, the Tzemach Tzedek himself, till now we were discussing a letter of his, has another teaching where he says, the Talmud says talk it over to others, but I want to provide a qualification to the word others. Others only in body, but not in soul. In other words, these are people who are really close to you. You have a great relationship with them. You have an intimate connection with them. So yes, you're two different bodies, but you're one in mind. You're one in heart. That's the person who could share empathy. That's the person who's going to be able to listen. That's the person who, after you speak with that person, you will feel the burden somewhat coming off your shoulders. So yes, Rashi is definitely right that I may get good advice by speaking to somebody else, but the Tzemach Tzedek adds it's not only about the advice, it's also about that connection, the relationship. Human beings, we were not created to be isolated individuals. We were created to be part of communities, to be part of families, to have connections with other people. And sometimes, although it seems unrelated, the very fact that I am now better linked to another person, better linked in a family, better linked in a community, that itself, all of a sudden that same feeling, that same negative emotion suddenly seems a lot less ominous. Like this famous study that was done about asking people to measure how big, how large, how tall a certain mountain is. And what they found was that when there's one person standing alone at the mountaintop, that person estimates the mountain to be a lot taller and that it will take a lot longer to climb than if that person is with other people. Somehow, the fact that I'm with other people just makes the task look less daunting. The mountain isn't as high. And that's a big part of sharing our concerns with other people, which is why it's so important that all of us have that ability, have that shoulder we could cry on, have that other person we could be with. But what I find really interesting about this is the fact that there's a debate about this issue. Which one is it? Is it to cast it away, as one view in the Talmud says, and which the Rebbe was writing to Reb Shlomo? Or is it to speak it over to others, as another view in the Talmud says, and Rashi supported, and the Tzemach Tzedek himself endorsed as well? Which is it? Well, academically, it may be an interesting question, but personally, I don't think it's a question at all. The answer is it's both. I know for myself that I've used both. There are times that this model was the right one and more effective. There were times that this model was more effective. Not all people are the same. Not all worries are the same. Not all times are the same. It's important that we recognize that and that we not assume that one solution is a cookie-cutter solution for everybody else. Okay, now in this light, I want to share with you an interesting diary entry from the Rebbe's mother. The Rebbe's mother, her name was Rebbe Tzimchana. She passed away in the fall of 1964. She came from Russia and lived the final years of her life in America. She wrote a diary, which has not been published properly yet and has not been translated yet, but I understand that these are things that are going to happen soon. She writes in a diary entry in Kislev Tafshin Yodale, that's the end of 1953, she writes as follows. The Talmudic rabbis talk about how to get rid of worry, and they offer 3 models, she writes. This is interesting. The first one, get it out of your mind entirely in a way that it's gone forever, as if it was never there. She writes, I still cannot do that. Still, maybe I'm trying, but I still cannot do that. I can't do that. Second interpretation, push away the worry, not in a way where you're getting rid of it entirely, but you're pushing away it right now in the moment. It's not consciously there. I'm investing effort in doing that, she writes in her diary. Third interpretation, speak it over with somebody else. She writes in Yiddish, she wrote this diary, Ich hab kemat nit farvemen. I almost have no one. I basically have no one with whom I can do this with. If you read the diary, it becomes clear. She felt that it was very important that she not burden her son, the Rebbe. He already has so many burdens on his head. I don't want to bother him. And she would go out of her way to put up a facade that everything was good and everything was fine. You don't need to worry about me. And he did the same thing to her. And it's a very interesting dynamic in their relationship that they had with each other. But what a fascinating thing. What a sad thing. Ich hab kemat nit farvemen. I don't have someone else who I can do this with. What an amazing lesson that we need to think about. First of all, for ourselves, to ensure that we're doing everything we can to have people around us who we can converse with about these personal matters. But number 2, another thing to think about is, can you be that person for somebody else? And I think the answer is yes, but we probably need to do more in order to make ourselves available for other people and connect with other people so that we're there for them when they have a need. There was a special writer, a poet in Crown Heights, whose name was Tzvi Yoyer Steinmetz. He used to sit at the Farbrengens of the Rebbe, and after, he would go to a local shul, a local synagogue, and repeat a gist of what he heard in the Chevra Shas Shul on Montgomery Street and Kingston Avenue. Sometimes the Rebbe's Farbrengens would run late. And so the time when he needs to be in the shul to repeat has come. But he's still at the Rebbe's Farbrengen because it isn't over yet. Well, what does he do? People are waiting for him. So he left. He gets up in the middle, and he walked out, and he went down Kingston Avenue to repeat what he had heard, even though it didn't conclude yet, to the audience that was gathered there. He did this a few times. It was starting to bother him. And he wrote this letter to the Rebbe and saying, I'm not sure what to do. And as a great writer, he was able to bring to bear biblical language and Talmudic language into the way he wrote. And he positioned his dilemma as a problem of my life versus their lives. The Talmud discusses what is one supposed to do when they're stranded in the desert and they have one glass of water, one jug of water, and there are other people. Is your life first or is their life first? Chayecha koidmin or chayecha koidmin or chayehem koidmin? Whose life takes precedence? Well, that's the language he used in writing to the Rebbe, saying, whose life takes precedence? Is it my life, which means I stay by the Farbrengen to gain more spiritual nourishment, or is it their lives, and so therefore I leave the Farbrengen in order to share with them? Well, the Rebbe didn't like that false dichotomy, and the Rebbe said it is a false dichotomy. The Rebbe circled the line about going to the shul to shir and wrote, Adarabba, to the contrary, Zehu chayav, this is your life. Don't position your life as being by the Farbrengen and their life as me sharing with them. No, your livelihood, your life is sharing with others. And here he quoted 2 teachings. One teaching is from the Midrash, where the famous story of Ruth, where she comes home after she was supported by Boaz, and Boaz provided a sustenance for her. When she came home and she speaks to Naomi and she says what happened, she says, I did a little, I did for him. That's the language that Ruth uses. Really, Boaz did for her by providing for her. But she used language, Eis asher asisi imai, I did for him. So the rabbis noted that, and they said, yes, indeed, Ruth, receiving the charity, did for Boaz, because more than the patron does for the recipient does for the patron. So in other words, you may be thinking, oh, I'm giving, I'm helping someone else. True. But in fact, that is your life. You're gaining so much for yourself on a personal level by being in that shul and by speaking words of Chassidus. And in fact, the Baal Shem Tov taught, the Rebbe actually used the words Amru Razal, our sages taught, which is a term usually reserved for talking about the Talmudic rabbis. Our sages taught, the Baal Shem Tov, that a neshama comes down to this world for 70, 80 years for the purpose of doing a favor one time to one Jew. Well, then that is your life. If the whole reason why your soul comes down is to do a favor for another Jew, don't say, my life is to be by the Fabrengen. Their life is about me sharing with them. No, that is your life. Your entire life is about being there for somebody else. There's a beautiful midrash about the word lam natseach. Many chapters in Tehillim begin with this mysterious word, lam natseach. And there are many interpretations of what this word may mean. One of the interpretations is that it's a reference to God. Lam Natseach is a reference to God. Well, it's another name for God. There are so many names for God, so we have another name for God. Lam Natseach. What is the significance of this name? How does it spell God? Well, the Medrash says you got to break up the word. Lam Natseach, you read it as follows. Lam Natseach, limi shemevakesh lehi Natseach. To he who wishes to be defeated. That's what Lam Natseach means. He who wishes to be defeated. God is one who wishes to be defeated. What does that mean? God wants to be defeated? What does that mean? Lam Natseach? Well, the Midrash says as follows. When it came to the generation of the flood, God says, I showed my might. I got my way. They weren't listening, so I destroyed them. I won. I won. When it came to the generation of Sodom, they were wicked. I showed my might, and I destroyed them. I won. In both of these instances, I won. But did I win? No, I lost. God says, why did I lose? Because I lost the people. I lost the people of Sodom, and I lost the people of the flood. It was a victory that came at a great expense to me. That's not true winning. You know what so I won, but it's not a worthy victory. But then came the generation of the Jews who sinned with the golden calf. And I lost. I wanted to destroy them. And Moses overpowered me. And Moses convinced me to spare them, which I did. I lost. But I won because the Jewish people survived. So I won. So I want to be defeated. God says, Lam Natseach, I am Lam Natseach. I want to be defeated because that initial urge that I had to destroy the generations, I don't want that. It's not good for me when that happens. I want to be defeated. I think this midrash has profound insight for our relationships with other people. You know, sometimes we're so focused on winning. I want to win. I want to win. When you're winning, are you really winning? Sometimes you think you're winning, but in fact, you won, but there's so much that you lost. On the other hand, there are times when you have to say, you know something, you're right. I am sorry. Or I had to give up some of my time. I gave up an hour of my time. I was defeated. I had to give up my time. I had to say I'm sorry. I had to say I was wrong. You won. We should be Lam Natseach. We should be people who want to be defeated. We should be people who are comfortable saying I'm sorry. We should be people who are comfortable saying I want to connect with that other person, and so I'm giving up on my time. All of this was a derech agav. This was a side note. The side note was, we're talking about anxiety. And we had the message of the Tzemach Tzedek, message number 1, cast it away. Message number 2 we saw in the Talmud was, speak about it. But in order to speak about it, we need to have those relationships. And I'm stressing here the need to be there for other people, which means sacrificing, but that sacrifice is worth it. Okay, let's go back to the letter of the Tzemach Tzedek. He then continues and says, I want to issue another statement in this regard. Till now, I just focused on putting your mind elsewhere. there's another thing you need to do. I want to focus on speech and action. Now that's interesting, because we're dealing here with an emotional issue, worries, anxiety. Okay, so till now we were talking about thoughts, I get that. Now we're moving to speech and action. Why are we talking about speech and action? Says the Tzemach Tzedek, let's open the Sefer HaChinuch and let's read the philosophy in this book of Sefer HaChinuch. So a word about Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch is a medieval, anonymous work. We do not know who wrote it. It goes through the 613 commandments, says who has to keep it, when it needs to be kept, some of the details of each of the laws, and it also provides rationales for each of the mitzvahs. Now that itself is controversial and interesting. Should we be providing rationales for mitzvahs? And if yes, for all of them, for some of them, how? That's a fascinating topic. Suffice for now that the Sefer HaChinuch believes it's a great idea to offer reasons for mitzvahs and for all of the mitzvahs. Now, most of the reasons that the Sefer HaChinuch provides for mitzvahs are that they shape human character. They shape opinion. They shape feeling. And here he confronts a major challenge. On the one hand, he wants the reason for every mitzvah to be that it shapes opinion, it shapes a feeling, and all of that. Okay, great. The problem is, most of the mitzvahs are actions. So it would make more sense, if he's right, that it's all about opinions and feelings, so all the mitzvahs should be meditations. But they're not. They're actions. So this is the big problem that the Sefer HaChinuch has to deal in this anonymous 14th century work. What's the deal? How do we deal with this? What's his answer? His answer is counterintuitive, but what he says is the best way to shape opinions, the best way to mold emotions, the best way to alter feelings is through action, not through meditation. It's through action. When a person behaves in a certain way, it shapes their opinions and has an impact on their emotions. We often think, no, it's the way you think, the way you feel, and that's true. But in addition to that, the way you act is the way you feel. The way you act is the way you believe. You want to alter your beliefs? You want to change your opinions? You want to feel different about something? Act in accordance with that desire where you want to be, and watch. You will slowly get there. And that's how he's able to deal with this problem, where on the one hand, every mitzvah is about shaping an opinion, a belief, and a feeling, and at the same time, they're all action-oriented. In his famous, immortal words, Acharei hamaisim nimshachim halavavos. The heart follows the deed. He wasn't the first to say this. Maimonides, it was a big proponent of this model, otherwise known as behaviorism, which is about action. And what the Rambam says is that if a person finds they're getting angry too often or they're feeling too arrogant, you want to change it through behavior. So that means say, what are the actions that a non-angry person does? I'm going to engage in those. What are the actions that a non-arrogant person does? I'm going to engage in those. And watch, he says, slowly, you're actually going to alter the feeling that you have. Says the Tzemach Tzedek, that's relevant here too. Why? Because if it's true for anger, and if it's true for arrogance, and it's true for all these other things, it should be true for anxiety as well. What does that mean, he says? What Reb Shlomo, he says, what you need to do is you need to start speaking positive language, calm language, non-anxious language, and I need you to physically carry yourself in a happy manner. You know, sometimes dancing is an expression of joy. Dancing can also be the trigger for joy. Now, he doesn't specifically call for dancing per se, but he says happy action. So I don't know if he means the posture of a person, if he means the smiling of the person, but it generally means let something that is behavior-based, something that is action-based, in addition to speech. This is what we need to do. Okay? So now we have two ideas in this letter. One is centered on controlling our thoughts. The other, which was not in the letter per se, was about friendships and relationships with others. And the third thing was start with the speech, start with the action. At this point in the letter, the Tzemach Tzedek says, and now we are going to go Kabbalah. Now we're going to go mystical. So this is a level up. And he explains a complex idea, which we'll just briefly summarize here as follows. The intuitive way of thinking about the relationship between us and what's up there is that we are kind of at the bottom. And the strings are all being pulled up there. And we're kind of the puppets down here seeing the result of all the action that's happening up there. Well, according to Kabbalah, it couldn't be further from the truth. According to Kabbalah, there's this famous teaching, Da mala maila mimach. Know that what happens above is because of you. Meaning, the human being down here in this physical world has the ability to trigger and alter and change things that are going on in the heavenly realms. And as a result of that, he says, I want to tell you a personal story. He says, one night, I was davening Ma'ariv. Not with a minyan, I was davening Ma'ariv on my own. The only person who was there was my grandfather, the Alter Rebbe. And I was davening Ma'ariv with a niggin, with a tune of Mordechai, a melancholy tune, a somber tune. He's singing the words in a melancholy tune. The Alter Rebbe, his grandfather's looking at him, doesn't say anything. He waits for him to finish his prayers. Calls him over and says, my dear grandson, it's incorrect and improper to be praying and to generally to be in a bad mood, to sing a melancholy song. You should be singing happy tunes. And the Alter Rebbe here explained as follows. You know this Kabbalistic idea that what happens above depends on us down here? When you are in a happy state, you cause happiness above. What does happiness mean? When are we more generous? When are we more forgiving? When are we more giving? When we're happy or when we're sad? When we're happy. So when you are happy down here and you are causing happiness above, that means God is more generous, God is more forgiving, God is more giving. When, however, you are constricted and you're sad down here, so that causes sadness above. Sadness above leads to constriction, and so suddenly now we're not as worthy of all the blessings that we could have been. Therefore, please don't sing these type of somber songs. I need you to sing happy tunes. This is what the Tzemach Tzedek writes. What was that evening? What was that night? That night was the night the Alter Rebbe passed away. On the Chaf Dalet Teves, Tov Kuf Ayin Gimel or Dalet? Tov Kuf Ayin Gimel. 18:12-13. Probably 18:13. In other words, this is one of the final teachings that the Alter Rebbe said on this earth, was when he called the Tzemach Tzedek over and told him this teaching. This is one of, as we can say, it's his tzava, it's the mandate given before he passed away, that this is an important model for life. And by the way, once you know this context, think about it. Why was the Tzemach Tzedek singing a somber tune? Well, they were on the run. It was wartime. This was Napoleon had his scorched earth policy where he tore up the entire region. The Alter Rebbe was running away from Napoleon for more than a year, and they're going from village to village, going through a very, very difficult time. And maybe it's precisely because of that the Alter Rebbe said, if we're in need of blessing, so definitely we need to be careful about this, to be happy, to allow the blessings to flow from above. And so the Tzemach Tzedek turns to the Shloimeh and says, I told you about controlling your thoughts. I told you, I mentioned to you about the need to behave and speak positively, and now I'm throwing in this Kabbalistic idea that if you want to be worthy of divine blessing, if you want divine generosity, then you need to be in a happy state so that up above they're in a happy state. This sums up the letter that the Tzemach Tzedek has written. And I think, personally, there's a lot in here for us humans to look at and to take and to find how we can bring this into our lives to deal with our own issues. However, there's more, there's always more, and I want to share some additional insights that we're able to take from some additional teachings. The Frierdiker Rebbe, the sixth Rebbe, had a grandmother whose name was Rebbetzin Rivka. And she shared with him the following story. In Lubavitch, one Yom Kippur, they were davening, they were praying, and they had a chazan that was world-renowned, or at least in Lubavitch they thought he was world-renowned. Isser the Chazan. Isser the Chazan was the cantor. When he prayed, everyone listened. It was something very special. That Yom Kippur, during the Avodah, there was a lightning, a dumer, that struck Lubavitch, and it caught fire and there was smoke. People in the shul did not really know what was going on, and a lot of people got anxious and worried. They started running out of the shul. When you have many people trying to get out of one single door, people could get injured, and indeed there were people who were injured. Baruch Hashem, no one perished, but there were people who broke limbs as they were running out of the shul because of this. However, the Chazan, Isser the Chazan, he didn't hear a thing. He didn't even know there was any lightning. He continued with his prayers. The Rebbe was standing next to him. This is the Rebbe Maharash was standing next to him, and he heard and saw what was going on, but he stayed at his lectern, continued with his prayer, did not move. The people who were immediately around the Rebbe, seeing that the Rebbe was calm, so that calmness rubbed off onto them, and they remained calm, and they stayed in the shul, and they did not run out. This is the story that Rebbetzin Rivka shared with her grandson, who repeated it at a later date. I think we see here 4 prototypes for how we deal with fears. First is Isser the Chazan. Isser the Chazan is that person who is completely oblivious to what's going on around him because he's so immersed in his prayer. Perhaps that's something that's possible for some people. It's definitely very difficult for most of us, and I don't think it's what should be desired in most situations. To be completely oblivious is usually not on the table. Then there was the Rebbe. The Rebbe knew what was going on, and he was not afraid. Okay, but that's a Rebbe. That's a Rebbe. A Rebbe has great powers. They're able to do these things. That's not me. I'm not able to live my life in that type of way. So we're left with 2 groups. There's the group that ran out of the shul. That's me. I'm more like those types of people who would run out. But I don't want to hurt myself. And they did hurt themselves, because we all know that when we act out of fear, usually the harm that we cause is much greater than the fear itself. So I belong in that group, but I don't want to be part of that group. And so that leaves one group remaining, the people who are standing around the Rebbe. Here, they were afraid. Of course they were. They were afraid like everybody else. They saw what was going on. They weren't oblivious. And no, they're not holy, special people. They weren't saints. They weren't angels. They're not like a Rebbe. But they were safe. And they did not run out of the shul. And they did not hurt themselves. They didn't act on their anxiety because they had a center. They had a focal point. They had something higher that was present next to them. And they were connected to that. They saw that. They observed that. And they said, I can feel better. I could lean on that. And I think this is crucially important for how we live our lives. We need to have a center. We need to have that entity that we can link ourselves to. That although we're seeing what's going on, we're not oblivious. We're involved in day-to-day life. We deal with day-to-day life. We're not the chazan who recluses himself. But at the end of the day, we can be, if we have that center, if we have that power, if we have that link, we're able to manage, we're able to navigate, we're able to go through the things that we need to go through. What could that center be? Everyone can find for themselves what it is. But the things that seems reasonable to me, one of the concepts, daily prayer, for example, the idea of spending 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes a day thinking about the Creator and Hashem and how He interrelates with our world, that could be the center. Saying Shema before we go to sleep at night, closing our day by declaring the fact that Hashem is in full control, that could be our center. And additionally, for me, when I study the Torah of the Rebbe, when I study the teachings of the Rebbe, when it's his commentary on the Torah, or whether it's the letters and the guidance for life, to me that is a center. That is something that anchors me. And then throughout the day, when I'm going through life, I find that suddenly things seem less ominous. Not only do I have that friend with me, who we spoke about earlier, but I have a friend with me that is also a spiritual anchor. And that makes all of the difference. You know, in the early years of the Rebbe's leadership, there wasn't a lot coming out from him in terms of his Likutei Sichot, and that is his talks. Because the way it worked is that people would write it up, and then he would edit it to give out. But that takes time. That takes time. So one time there were 2 young Hasidim. One's name was Rav Nachman Sudak, and the other one's name was Leibel Raskin. And they went into the Rebbe's secretary, Rabbi Chodakov, and they said, Here is an essay. Please have the Rebbe edit this so we can give it out. It's important that we have this. Rabbi Chodakov looked at them and said, the Rebbe has letters up till here from all over the world with people dealing with questions of life and death. you want me to bring in this essay into the Rebbe? They said, this too is a matter of life and death. They were smart. This too is a matter of life and death. And indeed, they took it in, and the Rebbe did edit it, and we have that talk edited with us to today. And I don't think they were using hyperbolic language. That actually resonates very much with me. Because in order for us to live life, we need these things. We have to have these things to study, to lean on. That becomes our center. And then we're like the circle of the Hasidim. We're standing around the Rebbe, knowing what's going on, but also knowing that they were going to be okay. Now, all of the above, we were talking about anxiety and worries in the sense when we're worried that something negative is going to happen to us. But we all know that stress is not only about worry in the future about some negative event that may happen. Sometimes there's something more existential, where the person is just not at ease. And that's also something that needs to be discussed, and we need to explore why that is and what we can do about that. There's a verse in Tehillim that says, Eretz Yara Vishakata. The earth was afraid and then calmed down. What does that mean, that the earth was afraid and then calmed down? So the Talmud explains, the earth was afraid for its very existence because it didn't know if it will survive, because God made a condition that only if the Jews accept the Torah, then the world can endure. So therefore, for the first 2,000 or so years of the world's existence, we didn't know if we're going to continue existing, so we were anxious. When we learned that the Jews accepted the Torah and therefore life could continue, the world became calm. Eretz Yara, the first 2 millennia, it was concerned, and then Shakata, it found peace. So the Rebbe once examined this passage and says, we see from here that the giving of the Torah, and broadly speaking, the learning of the Torah and embracing the Torah has to be something that makes us tranquil. How is that, and why is that? And he explained as follows, and I quote from a talk from 1991. When we fail to sense the purpose and goal of our lives, which is, I am created to serve my Maker, we cannot find true calmness and serenity. That's because time is constantly changing. We need to be at different places. There are so many details and sub-details in our lives. All of this causes a constant unrest that fragments us and scatters us into pieces. In the Yiddish, it causes a ständige Umru, unrest, verspaltem voneinander, that scatters and fragments the person. When, however, we sense the purpose and goal that can be found in all the details of our lives, then we can find the tranquility that flows from unity. This leads to living better. Indeed, we readily observe that we live better when we are calmer. What's the Rebbe's point here? The point here is, this is not an issue about I'm worried that X is going to happen. There's another issue we all face, and that is there is so much pulling at us. There are so many things that we need to do. We wear many hats. There are so many details in life, and just being involved in that scatters the person and fragments the person, and that causes an existential angst that itself is a problem. We need to find unity. What is the unity? What is the solution? The Rebbe says the solution is when we realize that all of the things that we're doing, they're really one thing. We don't do 100 things. We don't do 5 things. We don't go to 5 places. It's all one thing. It's I am here to serve Him. I am here to serve my Creator. The expression of that is all of the specific details, but when we're able to find that greater unity, suddenly we aren't fragmented into all these different areas. When I study this, I suddenly thought, and now we can understand on a new level a major stress in the Rebbe's teachings on the concepts of knowing God in all of your ways. And I want to give a few examples of where you see this, and from the examples you'll understand the rule a little better. There was a Jew lived in New York whose name was Jacob Pearl. And Jacob Pearl owned I don't know if it was dry cleaning or if it was a laundry service. I believe it was a regular laundry service. He came to the Rebbe, and he was in touch with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe sent him a letter and said, you are involved in the laundry business. That means that you need to derive a lesson in life from the laundry business. So let me tell you what it is. You know, we get clothes, and it's perfect. It's clean. It's pressed. It's nice. And then it gets dusty. It gets dirty. It gets creased. So you would think, okay, toss it out. Get rid of it. It's done. It's dusty. It's dirty. It's creased. We don't do that. What do? We send it to the cleaning company. That will clean the clothes. And then it's as good as new. What's the message? The soul. The soul comes into this world, it is pure. Neshama shenasata bi tahirei, it is 100% pure. But then life happens. We get dusty. We get creased. We get dirty. What happens? Give up, it's over. I sinned, I transgressed, I did something that's wrong. No. Laundry. What's laundry? We're able to take these garments and we put it through the process and we're able to be as good as new. What is the process? The key is water. Warm water. What's water? Water. Emayim ela Torah. So often our sages teach us that water corresponds to the Torah. Nourishing water. Prayer. Shifchi kamayim libech. We pour out our heart to God like water pours to the floor. Torah and tefillah, Torah and prayer are the water. The other mitzvahs, that corresponds to the detergent. He doesn't explain why, so I don't know. And then the iron, the metal of the iron. What is that? That's the yoke. That's the Kabbalah soil. That's the idea of saying, I submit. At the end of the day, every person in life cannot understand everything all the time. And we do have to say, you know something, largely this makes sense, so this detail doesn't. Okay, I accept. That's the Kabbalah soil, accepting of the yoke, where you have a heavy thing that's being laid upon you, and you say, I'm happy to accept that burden. That is the iron. This is one example of so many, where the Rebbe turned to people who were involved in certain professions, doctors, lawyers, accountants, whatever it was, and saying, look at what you're doing, there's a tremendous lesson for here in life. And then we have hobbies, where the Rebbe did this for hobbies as well. And one famous example is when the Rebbe spoke about soccer. This was in the spring of 1980, where the Rebbe spoke at length about 4 lessons we could take in life from the game of soccer. Number 1, how is the game executed? With the foot. What does the foot represent? The foot represents getting something done, even if you don't understand it, because the foot is very far away from the brain. It is very far away from the heart. That represents action, even if we don't have emotion involved, even if we don't understand it. Action without emotion, sometimes that's important too, right? When you're in a relationship and you only are nice to your spouse, when you feel it and you understand that it's not going to be good, sometimes you say, this is what I need to do. That's the foot. Number 1. Number 2, how to view opposition. No soccer superstar would be anyone of note if not for the opposing team. What makes this player so great that he could execute this kick is the fact that there's a defense. If there weren't a defense, so then there'd be no superstar. You wouldn't be great. That's how we need to look at opposition in life. When we run into a wall, when we face opposition like, oh, it's going to crush me. No, it's to bring out something great in you, just like the opposing team on a game. In a soccer game. Number 3, the opposing team's goal, or whatever you call it, I'm sorry, I don't know this game really well, is on the same exact field where you're trying to go. In other words, sometimes we think, I'm in a good place, and evil is very, very, very far from me. Like, I don't have to worry about it. No, it's right over there. He quotes a Talmud that says the gate of Gehenna, the gate of hell is in Jerusalem. What does that mean? We don't know, but metaphorically, we understand that even in the pinnacle of holiness, you have the opportunity for failure right there. We always need to recognize that possibility for failure and transgression is right there. The other team can kick a goal and it's right there. Success for me is right here, but failure is right here on the same exact playing field. Number 4, quickness. Zrizus, alacrity, moving quickly. In this game, if you don't go quick, you lose. Interestingly, at least the other sports that I'm familiar with, whether it's American football or basketball or hockey, there is a clock. That clock stops. I don't know much about soccer, but my friends told me the clock runs the entire time. So maybe we could add that into the conversation here. How beautiful of an idea. Time doesn't stop. You got to move quickly. This is one example of the Rebbe looking at a hobby that people are engaged in and showing them the lessons to be learned from life. Didn't happen once. This didn't happen twice. This didn't happen 20 times. Hundreds and hundreds of times the Rebbe did this again and again and again, and many times he spoke about this value and the need for this. Why is this important? Oh, on so many levels. This is important on so many levels. But what we're seeing here today, and relevant for our topic here today, the Rebbe said we need to find unity in life. So if I'm one person when I go to shul in the morning and daven, and I'm one person when I study Torah, but then I'm also a parent, and I'm also a lawyer, and I also have tennis on Wednesday afternoons, that leads to fragmentation. That leads to scatteredness. Go to the soccer, go to the tennis, go to the study session and be the parent, but all of those things need to be part of how we're serving God. Suddenly, there's one thing that I have in my life. And so, if we just were to say, oh, I need to study this talk about soccer and know it, and we end there, then we miss the point. If Jacob Pearl heard this message about laundry and he stopped there, then we're missing the point. The idea is an attitude. The Rebbe jump-started an attitude. Jacob Pearl the next day should have said, what else can I learn today from the way my business will operate? What other inspiring moments could I find here? How can this be part of my service of God in additional ways? That's what we need to do. And when we do that, we find that unity, and suddenly we don't have so many things that are pulling at us. So in summary, we spoke about a few ideas. Each one of these is a lifelong journey. There's no easy answers. We spoke about using our mind properly, vesting our thoughts in good things and attractive things and healthy things and productive things, thereby divesting the negative emotion from our thoughts. We spoke about the need for us to have other people that we can talk to and us being there for other people. We spoke about the fact that action and speech is crucial, and even if we're feeling worried, we could still behave in a positive way. We could still speak positively, and that could impact our emotions. We spoke about having a center, something higher in our life. That is a common source to help us navigate life's storms. And we spoke about finding unity, trying to see how in all of the specific details in our lives, there is one thing that is happening. Let's conclude with two small anecdotes. In 1983, the Rebbe was corresponding with Mr. Zalman Jaffe from Manchester, England. And the Rebbe encouraged him that he should write a diary of when he visited New York, what he observed, what he saw. He said, oh, I don't know, I don't have anything to write. It's going to be a few pages. And he expressed worry to the Rebbe that he is not up to the task. Well, he did it. And sometime toward the end of the year, he sent in 116 pages of his experiences in New York. And the Rebbe responded to him as follows. You definitely remember, betach zoicher, you definitely remember, hadaiga shaloi, the thing you were worried about, ma yichtoi, when you were worrying what you were going to write. And look, you turned out 116 pages. So kein yevasar toiv b'chol hadaigas lo yoleinu, so too may you find that you are similarly able to announce good results about all other areas where you're worried about. And in fact, you can stop worrying with trust, uvesimcha, and with happiness. In other words, we all know this. We all know. Look back at those things you were once all tense about. Look back at those things that really consumed us at a given moment, the Rebbe was saying here. And look what happened. It all turned out okay. That's an exercise we can do. We can do because, yes, we have a lot of precedent. We have a lot of precedent of times when we were very worried and it worked out. The Rebbe is telling us and encouraging us here in this specific answer that we have that ability. Use those as moments to reflect and to say, just like it was true then, so it will be true now. And one other point, and that is in the winter of 1991, there was the attacks against Israel, the missiles, the Scuds, and all of that. Someone wrote to the Rebbe that everyone in Israel is worried. Kulam aleim daiga. Everyone is worried. The Rebbe was not happy with this line and responded, you are accusing good, wholesome, special Jews who trust in God that all of them are worried? Something is wrong with you. You need to check your tefillin and your mezuzahs. What's the message here? The message here is when the Rebbe looked at us, he did not see worrying people. He saw people who have the tools and who have the ability to live a life that's calm, to live a life that's serene. So let us all hope that we're able to actually implement that in our lives. And I wish all of you calmness and serenity and menucha and nachas. And this has been a true joy being able to teach and present in this environment. And I thank all of you for your participation.
Very big Yarchei. If I could ask everyone just to stay for a couple of minutes while we go through a few thanks that are in order for the Yarchei Kallah that we've all enjoyed so thoroughly. First of all, a big Yarchei to Rabbi Mordechai Dinerman for really phenomenal shiurim The morning sessions, separate for the men and the women, and the main presentations have really been outstanding, engaging, and left us with a lot to think about and a lot to implement and to apply.